it would be so interesting to know the number of people in this audience who had grandparents who lived in the city of Detroit in 1966, right? Exactly. A third or half the crowd. And they don't live there now because they can't, because it's dangerous and it's dysfunctional. You can't use the schools. But if your grandparents are still alive, it'd be interesting to ask them, like, what was 8th grade like in a public school in Detroit? And they would say it was great. I went to Latin class every Wednesday. Really? You studied Latin in a public school in Detroit? Yes, we did. Detroit was one of the richest cities in the world and helped build this country. And then in one summer, it disappeared. And it disappeared not simply because you had riots in the summer of '67 in Detroit, but because the productive people who lived there left. And that was a huge boon to Macomb and Oakland counties, but it completely destroyed the city of Detroit. Your grandparents built those brick buildings that are being reclaimed by the prairie right now. And as you drive through Detroit, and I always drive through Detroit, every time I visit my wife's family, I drive through Detroit every single time, and every single time I'm left with the exact same thought, which was, this is a magnificent place. This is an unbelievable city. This is fundamentally one of the prettiest places in America. The buildings are unbelievable. The abandoned buildings are unbelievable. And the beauty of Detroit, it's a little bit like Pompeii, because it happened in one day or 1 week, the riots of '67. I remember the first story I ever did, not to get sidetracked, but I did it in Detroit. There was a guy called Keith Butler who was on the city council, and I went to interview him in 1991. And his church was in a rough part of the city. Well, the whole city's rough, but the roughest part of the city. And I was driving in a cab to go interview him, and there was a building we drove by, and on the second floor was an ad for Cool cigarettes, and it said 25 cents a pack. And that sign had been there since the summer of '67 when that store was burned and closed. It was like frozen in time. And so that's the beautiful thing about driving through Detroit as opposed to New York or Chicago, cities that have been torn down and rebuilt countless times. Detroit just stopped. So as you drive through that city, you can tell what it was like on the day it burned. And it was an incredible place. Incredible. And the people there just left. They just left. And I guess what I'm saying again is we're running out of cities to run from. You think you're going to be safe in your suburb? When HUD mandates density, when there's Section 8 in your neighborhood, which is coming, because you're not safe in your suburb, actually. You're not. And next will be the rural area. I live in a town of 100 people. Why do I do that? Because I got sick of living in a city, because I'm a coward, I guess. I should have stayed. Everyone went insane with the BLM riots, and then COVID, and I said to my wife, and our kids were grown, I was like, we're out of here. We're moving to a town of 100 people where everyone open carries and there's no violent crime whatsoever. And yes, people do drink in the morning. That's true. The Congresswoman has raised her glass. But it's a humane and polite world. And I didn't want to deal with the rage that we saw all around us in a big city. And I feel much happier, of course, driving around with my dogs in that town, but I also feel correctly like I ran away from something and I should have stayed and fought. I was in that city for 35 years. So I think these are the things that I think about just because of the weirdness of my own personal life, but I think that this will be obvious to everybody in America. There's literally no place to go. Where you are now is probably the best it's ever going to be. It could get a whole lot worse. And you need to do everything you can to prevent that. And if that means that your life is going to be more uncomfortable for the time being, or you face greater risks, Dana Nessel decides to send you to prison. All right, that's the price. It's a smaller price than your ancestors paid, that's for sure. So what do? Stay and fight. But what does that look like before Dana Nessel comes to throw you in prison? Well, it means, first of all, getting rid of Dana Nessel. And the lunatics like her. It does. Leadership matters. You can have a system that nobody actually supports except the people directly benefiting from it. This is the main thing I've learned in the past 5 years that I'm 54, I've lived in this country my whole life, and because I, unlike everyone else in Washington, actually kind of believed in the basic premise of democracy, which is the majority rules. That's the most basic fact of democracy. The people run their own government. If you get a majority of people to vote for something, that's now the law. And that's totally untrue. You could put it in a ballot referendum, some judge will overturn it. Well, what about democracy? You can spend billions of dollars on a foreign policy theory that nobody actually supports. Doesn't matter. In the end, most governments are run by a small group of people for their own benefit without reference to what the majority wants. And I hate to believe that that's true in this country, but all the evidence suggests that it is. In fact, it's provable. You know how you prove it? Public opinion polling. Take a look at the latest Gallup poll. Pick a poll. What are the top 10 issues for people in the United States? And then compare those to the priorities of your leaders. So people are leaving Michigan because it's very hard to make a living here, and you're constantly hassled by a government that never stops growing and that is leeching off an economy that hasn't grown in decades, okay? That's the truth.